Hello again, and for the final time here, going through the close of Colossians. Close out the study. I know it's taken a while, but well, we're getting it done anyway. Um, if you think of where we've been, it's always good to keep in mind, the things that are going on in Colossae. A couple of, real dangerous false ideas of one is a work righteous thing, and one is a, trying to through my reason achieve something higher than what the gospel of Jesus is, and the letter deals with an awful lot of that. But at the end of it here, it gives some real practical stuff in life as far as how you live together in a congregation with each other. But the section before us here, which is about 10 verses, not even, um, that before the close, but talks about day to day, just relational stuff in the family. We might even say, in your work environment, it's going to sound a little different than that, and the world's not going to look at it that way. But we'll walk through and we'll cover this and close the book out. Just some questions. The idea that Paul's been talking about taking off the old and putting on the new, the regenerate new man that God has given us. What does it look like practically? It's one thing to say. I made the comment last time. I think it was last time, but Paul often talks about the attitude of the heart being the new man. Faith and peace and love and joy and compassion and these things that are really more attitudinal than they are practical. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Type of stuff. But he's going to talk now, really in the practical day to day relations that we have that are close knit, societal type of things. How does that new self with that attitude show itself, and what does it mean in these relationships? One of the big, watchwords, I guess, in our time is this idea of hierarchies and systemic hierarchies. Very negative in our political culture right now, tearing down the white supremacist hierarchy and all these things. And I think it's wrong to say that there are no hierarchies or that they shouldn't exist. I think that they're there. I mean, obviously they're there. And they should be there. And what do we make of them? How do we think of them? Because this does come up in this section as well. At least the general thought of it, and then we'll just close out some major takeaways from the letter and relive them a little bit at the end. Getting into it, closing out. Paul's going to talk about the closest of human relationships, the marriage relationship. Of course, that's it's around. I guess it's common, but it's trying to be deconstructed and reconstructed in our day, and made to look in a whole new way at what it is, that somehow marriage is wrong. That's the world's view of it. But Paul's going to talk about what God-given marriage really is and how it ought look, and he does it really, really quickly. And with these two verses, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and don't be harsh with them. Of course, the the world's going to look at it. Maybe we live in the world, and we might have a little bit of us that bristles, that says wives shouldn't have to submit to their husbands. And I guess maybe that word brings some things that are negative baggage that aren't intended here. I think the key to that word, submit yourselves, it's there in the translation. Who is the one who's forcing the submission? Who's the one that is impressing this, if you want to call it a hierarchy? Who's the one that is determining that wives are, if you want to look at it this way, but I think we'll talk through this and see that it really isn't. But if you want to look at it as, that the husband is the leader and the wife is submissive in that relationship, well, the call from Paul is to do that yourself. He doesn't say, husbands, make sure that your wives are submissive to you. He says, wives, submit yourselves. And it fits very nicely in with where Paul has tracked so far in this whole letter, putting on the new self, because the old self with its pride and its arrogance, doesn't want to submit to anyone or anything. Wants to do as it sees fit and wants to feed this appetite that it has. Paul has used that idea. We look at the idea of lust in terms of a purely sexual thing, but it's much more than that. My old self just has a lust for standing on its own and determining for itself what is right and what is wrong, what I shall do day by day. And Paul's application to taking that old self on and putting the new self on, which is created by Christ in his own image, is to submit yourselves in that relationship to your husband. And what's the point of it? Well, it's fitting in the Lord. It really is reflective of your relationship with your Lord. First and foremost, you're not so much submitting to your husband, because as a husband, I know we can all be clowns and everything else, but we submit to our Lord, and out of that submission and what is fitting in that relationship is, as wives, to submit yourselves in your relationship to your husbands. And that it doesn't mean that husbands ought to take advantage of their wives or have no concern for them. Husbands, love your wives. Don't be harsh with them. Don't rule over them. Don't force them and push them around. Don't think that you're the dictator now in the relationship just because God has established these things. Remember, if you go back to creation, that God made Adam, and he said there's one thing that's not good in this whole thing that he created. It's that the man was alone. And so he made a woman in the interest of the man, and that this relationship with the husband taking on the headship and the wife submitting herself to this really reflects a belief and an understanding in what God did in making marriage in the garden, and then functioning within that marriage as God intended from the very beginning. I understand that there's all kinds of sins that we can sit here and point out, but the sins are not an excuse to just do away with what God says or what Paul says here too. I've done enough counseling in marriage and pre-marriage counseling and everything else. The idea is always, well, we're co-equals. There is no leader. Well, it sounds great on paper, but it doesn't really work out all that well. I've counseled people, and take this isn't scriptural stuff, but practically it plays out. If somebody isn't in the lead, then nobody's leading. And I guess the best you have is every situation that you don't agree on, you compromise on. And what a compromise is, if you're here and I'm there, you come together and you meet in the middle. Well, the one who started here doesn't want to be here. This is where they start. And so neither is the one who started here. Do they want to be here? Do they understand what here even is? Because they understand it from here. So compromise seems like a really good idea at the time, but you end up with two people who don't know where they're functioning, oftentimes in a compromise type of situation. As good as it sounds and everything else, practically it doesn't necessarily play out. I always counsel couples, well, we'll do it your way one time, and the next time it comes up, do it the other person's way. Because at least one of you has an idea what you're doing then, and you're not constantly bickering about being in the middle and all that stuff too. Take that for what it's worth. I don't necessarily know if it's worth anything. I find it to be more practical than compromising itself. But anyway, this whole section, again, if you look at that relationship, and you couple in what Paul says elsewhere about marriage, love your wife and be willing to give yourself up for her. That you love her like Christ loved his church. Christ isn't a dictator of the church. He's laid his life down for her, has her best interests in mind. And all of us would look at that and say, he's not a weak husband, he's not a weak leader, but he's a leader who's willing to go to the nth degree for our benefit and for our good. And that should show up as, from husbands in their relationship with their wives too. So that this isn't, the idea of submit, we look at it maybe in terms of a hierarchy, the way the world looks at it, that the leader is imposing will on the ones beneath and forcing the ones beneath to do things they don't want, or enslaving those who are beneath them. And that is not at all what Paul's talking about. This is just a reflection of how God made marriage before sin entered the world and spoiled the relationship. The new self seeks to put what was lost back on by the grace of God, and it becomes a wives, submit yourself for the Lord's sake to your husband. And husbands, um, don't be this sinful, selfish creature that thinks that you're going to just use and abuse your wife. Serve her as well. Paul in Ephesians will say that too. Submit to each other. And it's not just a one-way submission and a ruling, but you're submitting to each other and loving each other, even as you understand and you function within the roles that God has intended in that relationship. This is another one that's, I think, worthy. I think the world has torn this one down. Parents and children, that relationship. You get less pushback, I think, saying that there's definitely a hierarchy there in the home between parents and children. At least there should be. That seems to be going away in our day, and is a struggle that kids should have a say, that kids should. And we listen to Paul's words. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. You don't have to, I don't think fathers as the head of the homes is listed there, but I don't think you exclude mothers. Some translations even will take that and say parents, that don't embitter your children, but it really doesn't talk about fathers, but I think as representative of the head of the household. But I think in that relationship, you can see and understand that children are just little personifications of what sinful flesh is, and they want to go their own way. It is not cliche to say that a child's first word that he learns is no. Right after mom and dad, it's no. The rebellion against the authority, against the hierarchy that is there, that God has established. Why does he do that? Well, it's for the benefit of the child. If you let a child just run his own way and do what he wants, he's not going to live long. If you think of the fourth commandment, honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you and you may live long life on the earth. It isn't a promise of a reward of a long life if you're obedient to your father and mother. It's just a statement of truth that if you don't honor and respect and obey your parents, you ain't going to live too long. I always use the example of teaching my kids not to play football or play baseball or go out and play in the street. You don't go play in the street. If you decide, Dad, I don't care, I'm going to go play in the street at 2-3 years old, good luck. It's a coin flip whether you see 4 years old, because at some point a car is going to get you. So obey your parents and everything. It's pleasing to the Lord. Again, remembering in this relationship, in this structure, it's God who has established this. The fourth commandment makes it clear. The parents are to be in this hierarchy over the children, for the good of the children. Again, what's this reciprocal thing? It's not abuse your children. It's not when you're angry with your children, spank them. It's not get physical with your children. It's not abuse. Use your children for your benefit. It's fathers, don't embitter your children, or they'll be discouraged. And there's all kinds of ways to do that. You've probably all seen examples, and probably all have been examples of that. Those of us who've been parents, where you get frustrated with a child, or maybe you're angry about something else, and your child comes along and starts to annoy you, and you lash out at your child, and the child doesn't even know what he's done. I can give you examples of the years that I spent as a dad too, where these things happen, and you have to go back and apologize to your children and ask for their forgiveness, and you realize that's not the way that it was meant to be set up. The other thing is, everything's a teachable moment. You're not here to get your kid to stop annoying you. You're here as a parent to teach and train and raise your child. You're part of their education. If you're just relying on a school to do that, you're missing the boat, because the school, what it teaches, will never, ever, ever be able to teach what a parent teaches in the home. If what the school teaches is countered in the home by its activity and by what it teaches and what it does, how it speaks, a school can't make up for that. And it can only supplement. what a home life is. And every time a child does wrong becomes a teachable moment about the relationship in the home, about who their Lord is and what their Lord asks of them. And the Lord asks of them that they would obey their parents, even if they don't agree with it, even if they don't like doing it. Tough. When you're a parent, you can determine things, but as for now, you just have to obey, grit your teeth, and go through it. And it's one of the great lessons I think that parents can teach their children too is that you're going to have to do things that you don't want to do. Suck it up, buttercup, that type of thing, and get on with it. When you get older, then you can start being a little more self-determinative than you are when you're 3, 4, 8, 10 years old. It gets hard. I know when kids get to be in their teenage years that they just want justification for everything. At least some of them, and to be able to get them to see and understand that you for the sake of the Lord, and your obedience and your love for Him, in your relationship in this hierarchy in the home, you have to be obedient to your parents. That's just how it is, and you got to learn to do that. Another cliche that's pretty valuable: you can't lead until you've learned to follow. Probably some wisdom in that. This one gets dicey too. You have to contextualize this and remember. When we think of slaves, we think of what we've learned about American slavery 200 years ago, and what it was, and we generally probably are thinking of it in horrific terms. It's a totally different economy, a totally different world. 2,000 years ago in the Roman Empire, when Rome expanded the empire and they took over countries, they captured people and they would become slaves in the empire. You didn't have this big, economic system, capitalist system that we have. There's always threads of capitalism that run through everything, but you didn't have worker unions and all this stuff that we have now. That really hasn't developed yet in Rome, and a lot of it was slave based. The estimates are up. I think I read a third of the people that were in the Roman Empire actually were slaves. So it was really a common station in life that you would be considered a slave, that you would be property. But within, again, this hierarchy that was there, and I think it's interesting the way that Paul deals with it. What does he say? Not slaves rise up and claim your freedom, not slaves form a union to make things better for yourself. What is it? Again, remember what this is spiritual exercise, taking off of the old pride and putting on the new that is reborn in the Lord. Obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. And Paul is masterful at this. Everything that he asks isn't that he asks because this will be better for you, or your masters won't treat you harshly then, or maybe we can change society over the course of time. It's understand your role in this world that is imperfect and messed up, and where God has placed you in time and place and vocation, and within that serve the Lord by what? Obeying your masters. Work hard. If you want to take a parallel from this, it would probably be if you're working, work hard. Make your employer some money. Don't look for ways to, out of every hour I'm looking for ways to get 38 minutes worth of a break. These types of things. Again, the new self, looking at things in a whole new way. And again, continuing with the slave thing, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It's the Lord Christ you're serving. Again, with everything in our life, the new man looks at it and stops saying, well, how is my paycheck going to get bigger? How am I going to retire quicker? How am I going to get a new car? How am I going to take a nice vacation? How am I going to buy new jewelry for my wife? How am I going to take another golf trip? How am I gonna, you stop looking at it that way, and and you say, well, no, my reward, my retirement, and my treasures in heaven, and I'm gonna get that. I'm working for that, and in the meantime, I'm working for my Lord by working hard for my master, for my employer. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs. There is no favoritism. Well, what about favoritism? Now look at the other side of that relationship. Masters, provide for your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. Again, you're functioning in this hierarchy, in this relationship, and even though you're at the top of it as the master, understanding that there's one higher than you, whom you are a slave of. Paul always introduces, and I shouldn't say always, but so often will introduce his letter saying, Paul, a slave of Christ. He looked at that and relished it. I haven't been freed from sin and death and the devil so that I might do as I will. I've been freed from that slavery so that I might become a slave and a servant of Christ. And that shows itself in my attitude and the way that I work and function within my day-to-day life, whether I'm a slave or whether I'm a master. We'll wait till the end for that. Now, encouragement to everybody. Christian life, devote yourself to prayer, being watchful and thankful. Pray for us, too, that God may open a door for our message so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I'm in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. So a Christian life becomes one that is not only devoted to reading the scriptures and receiving from God good graces, but one that is speaking with God and asking of our Heavenly Father, who's the high point of the hierarchy, whom we're all dependent on and serving, asking Him for things. Forgiveness. Day-to-day needs. All this. But interesting here that Paul, when he's sitting in prison, isn't saying, pray that this this injustice to me might be rectified in the courts. But he's saying, ask the Lord that He makes use of this opportunity through me, that I can make a good and a bold and a clear confession of who Christ is, given the context that he's in. Remember, he's in prison here in Rome, waiting for trial. He's going to stand before the big leader of the day, and he's doing it in every way, looking at it as an opportunity. Remember, God had called him to be the chosen instrument to take the gospel to the Gentiles and to kings and to rulers, and this was going to be a golden opportunity for him to be able to do that. And if you piece together Paul's life, you'll see that he did make use of this, that with the guards that were there over him, he was making appeals and presenting the gospel to some effect. And Paul's saying, please pray for it, which I think as a pastor is a good thought too for me to have, an encouragement for you. Pray for me, not for my physical health and that my kids get through school, and that's great if you do, but pray that there are opportunities that I see and that I do capitalize on to present the gospel, whether it's in-house here with the family of believers or outside of the house, because you do get opportunities to do that, and it's kind of hard to find these things, but I'd ask that you pray that the Lord would give me opportunities outside of the family of believers to be a model for Christ and to be a spokesman for Him, and to do it in a way that's clear and is blessed by God. Those are good things to pray for. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. The way that we act towards outsiders certainly is important. I've heard it said, how many gospels have been written? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and yours. And it does show up, yes, in the way that I speak, and I might be able to speak all the theology correctly and remember verbatim passages that are appropriate. But if the spirit with which I speak them and the attitude that I carry in my life betrays that, and I'm an angry fool, and I'm cussing constantly and walking around in a drunken stupor, then that's going to say something else. You want your life to be different. I always remember, and you don't think of it consciously, I don't think, but I remember working at the seminary, and I moved furniture with a good friend of mine, and we really enjoyed moving furniture. And I remember one shipper in particular who, as we were working, we worked really hard, probably to make money. I mean, to be honest with you, selfish motivation. But as we worked, and towards the end of the move, he finally asked, "What do you guys do?" I said, "Oh, we're at the seminary studying to be pastors." And he said, "I knew there was something different about you guys." That type of thing. And not to say that I fulfill it, because I'm sure there have been times that I've been the opposite way, that people couldn't believe that I'm a pastor, so I understand my own sinfulness, but it is true in point of fact. That the attitude that we carry, and how hard we work, and the way that we go about our life does say something, and people will notice that. People will notice that. Let your conversation always be full of grace, and I think that's a really good one. I was thinking about that quite a bit today, because I know I talked last time about being really legalistic with the way that I address sinners in this world, and I can say all the right things, but if my attitude is self-righteous and frankly hateful, then I'm betraying. It doesn't matter what I say, I'm betraying what I say. So let our conversations be always full of grace. And I think the way that the conversation is full of grace is that if our life is full of it, if we understand that we're only here by God's grace and His choice, and it has nothing to do with me at all, and just being thankful for that, our conversation will show that, as does our life. As we come in contact with people. And then Paul's we're gonna go through this pretty quick. Basically, it's going to be a greeting of a bunch of people who are with him. We'll stop at a couple of different spots that we can, but it becomes more of a personal letter now, dropping names and wanting to greet specific people. Tychicus will tell you the news about me. He doesn't get into his personal situation, where the trial stands, any of that stuff. All that stuff can be related by Tychicus. No doubt people are going to be asking what's going on with Paul, this type of stuff. He'll be able to do that. He was delivering the letter, that bundle package. Dear brother, faithful minister, fellow servant in the Lord. There's that word again, servant in the Lord, slave of the Lord. I'm sending him to you for the express purpose that you may know about our circumstances, and that he may encourage your hearts. He's coming with Onesimus. Remember, Philemon is the one of the other letters written to Philemon, the slave owner who owned Onesimus, who ran away. And now Paul met Onesimus, became a convert, realized the story, and he's like, "I know Philemon," and sends Onesimus back with a letter to Philemon. Return to your station. He didn't say, "No, stay in Rome. You shouldn't have to go back. Being a slave is horrible." He said, "No, in the Lord you go back, and that's your vocation. You serve the Lord by serving your master." He is coming with Onesimus, our faithful dear brother, who's one of you, which I think is him saying, don't look down at him for being a runaway slave. He's a brother in the Lord. It doesn't matter where we come from. There isn't slave and free. There isn't these things in Christ anymore. Those two will tell you everything that's happening here. My fellow prisoner Aristarchus sends you his greetings, as does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. By this time, Mark is reconciled, it seems like, to Paul. Remember, it's Barnabas' cousin who ran off, scared on the first journey, and didn't want to take him back. And then Barnabas and Mark went off and became their own mission team, and Silas joined Paul. But now Mark is reconciled. You've received instructions about him. If he comes to you, welcome him. Jesus, called Justus, also sends greetings. Don't know much about him. These are the only Jews among my co-workers for the kingdom of God, and they have proved a comfort to me. I think it's a neat thing, and I started thinking about practically, how would it, just because you have a couple of Jews with you who are in the faith, what kind of comfort is that? Well, remembering that basically the entirety of the Jewish nation had kicked away Christ. They hated Paul. The Jewish leadership, the Pharisees, were after him, guns ablazing. And to have Jews who were there, and I think of, Paul elsewhere will say, I was a Hebrew of Hebrews, of the tribe of Benjamin. And you think, well, what does that mean? Well, that means he's very familiar with the old ways. In fact, he probably was amongst the Jews. He was one of, a smaller sliver who could actually speak Hebrew. Um, so I have this picture of, you know, refugees that come over. My grandmother, when she was, an immigrant, coming. Where do you settle? You settle in Milwaukee, where all the Germans are, and you, at least if nothing else, you're an unfamiliar world and an unfamiliar vibe and territory. You don't know what to. But at least I can sit down and talk in my language and my tongue with people who can speak with me, and that's a comfort too. And I can't help but think that there's some of that. That is there, as well as to know that there are Jews who are coming, and because it's a heartbreaking thing for Paul to see how many are rejecting Christ, and he knows what that means, their eternal damnation. Epaphras, who's one of you and a servant of Christ Jesus, sends greetings. Remember, Epaphras is probably the guy who started at least the congregation in Colossae. And now he's with Paul. He's not coming with the contingent carrying the letters, but Paul wants to make sure that they know he says hello, he's with you. He's always wrestling in prayer for you, that you may stand firm and all the will of God mature and fully assured. I vouch for him that he's working hard for you and for those at Laodicea and Hierapolis, 2 cities around Colossae, same valley. Our dear friend Luke, the doctor, and Demas send greetings. I think that's an interesting one. We know about Luke, a constant companion of Paul through his journeys, recorded Luke's gospel, recorded Acts. Demas is one that's worth considering, because Paul mentions him as a cohort, in the ministry and everything else. Later on, he's going to write to Timothy about those who fall away, and he says Demas is one of them because he loved the world. And I don't know what that means. Maybe the pressure got too much and Demas renounced it so he didn't have to go to trial or be killed for what he believed. It's a good warning that just because you're in the faith today doesn't mean you're in the faith tomorrow. Human beings are what they are. Give my greetings to the brothers and sisters at Laodicea, to Nympha and the church in her house. Don't exactly know what that means. After this letter has been read to you, see that it is also read in the church of the Laodiceans, and that you in turn read the letter from Laodicea. Paul understood that when he wrote letters, they were being copied and passed around, and he wants to make sure that this is going to be done with this letter. Tell Archippus, see to it that you complete the ministry you have received in the Lord. Just an apostolic encouragement. And then Paul, oftentimes, this is an interesting one. Oftentimes, he, at the end of the letter, what seems to be happening is that Paul will dictate his letter for somebody else to write it. And then at the end of it, he'll seal it and prove that it was him, because he had distinguishing, handwriting of some kind. At the end of Galatians, I believe it is, he says, see what large handwriting I use. And there are those who say maybe the effect of him being blind and the scales coming off, or that his vision wasn't restored to perfect, pristine, but that he always wrestled with it. And so when he wrote, he had to write really big so he could see. If you have eye problems, you understand that. And maybe that became the distinguishing handwriting that a seal of authenticity, that Paul in fact dictated this letter. It's my letter. I write my greeting in my own hand. Remember my chains, and then grace be with you. And that is the end of the letter to the Colossians that Paul wrote in his day, and is still being passed from churches to churches in our day. How does a new self apply itself in day-to-day life? I couldn't help but think about Paul twice in this letter talking about the pattern of the world, the way that this world functions. Don't conform any longer to it, Paul says. And if you look around and you see it, and it's just exacerbating in our day, it is a mad scramble for the top of the hierarchy. Even as we bemoan the hierarchies that are there and we wish to rip them down, you realize that it's not to rip them down in a way that we all can be evil. This is this utopian dream that we can bring heaven to earth, that we're all equal and we all share and everybody's the same and all these things. But you realize as you watch it play out that can never be, because you can see people rushing to fill the top seat of whatever the hierarchy is that they wish to rebuild. That's the way it always ends up. So the idea that you're ever going to get away from systemic hierarchies, I think, is foolery. It doesn't work that way. God, in fact, established them. He established them in marriage. He established them in government. It's the way it works. Even the slave-master relationship, Paul doesn't talk about ripping it down. He just function as a Christian within it. And think of how good it will be. And so when you look at the hierarchies in the world, and they're dysfunctional for sure, it's not to say that there isn't racism and sexism and all these things that are out there. You'll be able to find them for sure. But the hierarchies we're not going to get away from. But think if everybody could put on the new man and function within the hierarchy that way, that the problem with the hierarchies go away. If we could do that, rather than the selfish self that wants what this person has, or for whatever reason wants to sit at the top and dictate to people underneath for the sake of having that power. That's the pattern of the world. Paul says we don't conform to that anymore. We put on the new self, created by Christ, to be in his own image. And when that happens, then the things blind away. There is no longer male and female, slave and free, Scythian and barbarian and Roman and Jew and Gentile. Those things go away because we're all serving the Lord. And that, what becomes the real hierarchy? There's really only one. There's God sitting on top, Christ ruling this world, and all the rest of us. That becomes the hierarchy. Major takeaways from the letter. I think if you look at it in terms of what Paul is really addressing there, the self-righteousness and the works-based thing that goes along with faith, Paul really attacks that. There's nothing more you need to do. Christ has done everything. He's fulfilled everything. Good thing to always keep in mind. What we do and how our life looks does not reflect that we're somehow more worthy of heaven than the next guy who doesn't do these things, because that is a constant human way of looking at things. That is the pattern of this world. And the other thing, there's got to be more knowledge than just the simplicity of who Christ is, the one who lived for us, who died for us, who rose again and will come again. There's got to be more to it than that. No, it really isn't. And why would there need to be more? He's fulfilled and done everything. Why are we looking for more to be done when everything has been done? And that's what Paul's plain message is here. That knowledge and belief and faith and confidence in that impacts who we are and how we function in this world. We're not trying to change the world. We're begging that God would day by day change our hearts as we function in this dysfunctional world, and share the gospel in our way of life, in our speech, in our attitude, and then finally in sharing the gospel with the world around us as they run around and conformed to the ways of the world and lost and fighting and angry and bitter and despair and depressed and can't find meaning in life, don't know what morality, all these things. They're so confused. This world is so confused right now. The light of what Christ is, it is the very thing we want to be mirrors and reflectors of and sources of for their benefit. I didn't know what to put up for this section. But I thought, because this idea of hierarchies is so huge right now, I just go back and look at not Christ in the world, but Christ as a rabbi in the Jewish world. He took on what that system was, and he went out and he recruited a school, of disciples. That was not odd. It wasn't like when Jesus walked around with 12 guys following him, that people would scratch their head and say, well, what is going on? Well, that's how rabbis did things. They got disciples followed him, for a period of time, and day by day he lived and taught as he could in that day by day setting. And Jesus did much the same thing. And in many ways, outside of the miracles and the fact his teaching was so authoritative, was left people scratching their heads. Well, of course, he's the rabbi of rabbis, but it wouldn't have looked totally different than what you would have normally seen. But if you were in this room, it would have. The washing of feet before a meal, you can imagine at that time in that place you would have done that. Especially if there were, if you have an upper room and there's any kind of wealth at all, they're going to have decent flooring. It's not like a dirt floor. You don't want to track all the stuff that you've been, walking around in all day onto the floor. So you would have the wash basin there, and feet would be washed. And the only one who could wash was a slave. And within the school, the rabbinical school, the rabbi had certain privileges. Carry this for me, go get that for me, go do, and pretty much could ask his disciples to do whatever he asked. And one of the things he could not ask his disciples to do was to do the washing of feet. Couldn't ask a disciple to wash his feet, because that was below even a disciple. That was a slave's job. A nobody had to do that for you. So it's profound that the one who sits on the top of the hierarchy bent down and washed the feet of his disciples. Otherworldly. Our duty is to see things differently. And the new heart that Christ gives helps us to function within the systems completely differently. I hope and pray that we can all do that, walking through Colossians is, helps us do that as we go out into this world and just live our life, the life that God has given us to live. We're not here to do these spectacular super things. We're here to be ordinary people who have been extraordinarily changed as we function as people. So encouragement there for you. Colossians, finally done. It took long enough, but we're done with it. I know it's a longer section, but I figured we'd close it out. God bless. And if you have ideas for something else that we could do, we're looking at maybe using this type of thing for small groups. Obviously, we keep the shorter things, maybe get some written stuff. But if you have ideas for that, whether it's topical or books of the Bible, don't be afraid to email Jim or myself, talk to us on Sunday, or give us a call. God bless.